All right, so I've put his more full bio in the show notes below, but let's go ahead and get right to it because, as I said, our first time meeting, so to speak, was through those airwaves at WPFW in Washington, D.C. And of course, I'm talking about Dr. Frank Wilderson, who, among many other things, is a professor at UC Irvine and has publications like Red, White, and Black, Cinema and the Structure of U.S. Antagonisms. And of course, as I mentioned at the top, he wrote Incognegro, a memoir of exile and apartheid. And we are talking today about his most recent book, Afro-pessimism, a theoretical approach to the world that he is credited, and I think rightfully so, as founding or being its most prominent spokesperson. So Frank Wilderson, welcome back. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jared. It's great to be back with you. And shout out to Todd and Dr. Haight, too.
No doubt. Absolutely. Our original crew. And look, I'll put I got to add those links to the show notes for this as well, because I would encourage people to go check out a lot of those discussions that will probably cover things we won't get to today. My favorite among which is your Incognegro memoir. And of course, all the discussions we've had about Chris Hani in particular. People should go check all that out. So anyways, good to see you. Thank you again for coming through. As I was joking with you, somewhat joking with you, my presumed or real association with you has been causing me so many problems and raising so many questions for so many people for so long. And and I wanted to start with, a couple of years ago, I did an interview with Dr. Lewis Gordon. And I have to be honest, at the time, I did not understand the depths of his disagreement with you and your work. I didn't understand, so when he came on and we had this interview, he was right in his critique of me, that when he said that a lot of people who are critical of the critics of Afro-pessimism haven't read the criticism. And at that time, I certainly hadn't engaged much of it at all. And as I kept saying, look, my engagement with Frank is largely around Incognegro, the politics you represent in that memoir, the worldview you represent in that memoir still is to me tremendously appealing. So I was never claiming to be an expert in Afro-pessimism in favor or as a critic, but I just thought, it just seemed odd to me, some of the criticisms I was hearing of your work. So, which would include, for instance, some of the more easy stuff, the dismissal of feminism, Marxism, et cetera, and so forth, or discussing the limitations of those theoretical approaches. But the biggest ones are that your argument is discouraging of political activism, that it's just saying we should just give up and not struggle, and that it prohibits solidarity with other, particularly non-white, colonized struggles and peoples moving in their movements. So in a recent interview, and I will get, I'm going to stop this long preamble in a minute, but I just wanted.
I'm listening. I'm interested.
No, I hear you. I hear you. But in a recent interview I did with Nora Erekat, the Palestinian lawyer and activist, she had put me in, she put me up on an interview that she had done with Mark Lamont Hill, where our interview for some years ago, one of them, a transcript of them, was used as a way to discredit Afro-pessimism and to say that Afro-pessimism encourages a lack of solidarity. And in that excerpted piece, you were saying, and I don't know, the transcript rang true to my memory, at least. What you were basically saying is that, listen, Palestinians will work with them and we'll struggle with them, but after we get them free from Israel, we're going to have to check them on their anti-blackness. And I said, I agreed. But this was extrapolated to mean that there can be no solidarity. And I've heard this many times. People have said this to me a lot. And I've always said, but I don't get that from your work. Now, it is true I don't understand everything, including your latest book. I'm not going to claim to understand it all. We'll get to that in a minute. But so I wanted to really just start right there. Can you just clarify, before we get into the depth as much as possible of of the theory? Is your argument intending to discourage Black people from struggling at all, from appreciating their radical political histories? And are you saying that there should be no solidarity with other folks? Because to the point about Lewis Gordon, since then I have read a good number of the critics, and on these issues, I don't understand or agree with what they're saying in terms of how they interpret your work. But anyway, so let's just start there. Are you saying any of that in your work, intending to at least?
Absolutely not. However, I do understand how it could be perceived as my having said that, because most people come at a unequivocally Black cry and an unapologetically Black analysis of everyone else. In other words, people experience us looking at them analytically as an assault on them. And so what happens is that Afro-pessimism is an analytic interpretation of everyone else's capacity. I'll repeat that, an analytic interpretation of everyone else's capacity. And just as Marx condemns the capacity of the capitalist, whether it's a good capitalist like George Soros, who is actually, I want to give a shout out to George Soros because he's a part of the distribution network for Afro-pessimism. When he poured millions of dollars into urban debate camps, what he did is he created a pipeline for Afro-pessimist texts to be infused in the inner city without even knowing what he did. So thank you, my man. You know what I'm saying? but what I'm trying to say is that what I don't give a fuck about. Can I swear on here?
Absolutely.
Okay. I really don't care that the sentimental response to the analytic critique clouds the other person's capacity to understand the analysis. I think that we, for hundreds of years, we have reached across the water and tried to help these people understand our suffering and understand their relationship to it. And that's a kind of cosmic manifestation that began, over 1,400 years ago in the Bantu migration. It's called Ubuntu, which means goodwill and compassion and love of the other. And so what you can rightfully say is that there is no Ubuntu in Afro-pessimism. It's just a cold gaze. But that doesn't mean that it's actually saying what the other people experience it to be saying. Solidarity is, I mean, I'm checking myself now at 65 on my solidarity. I'm fucking sick of it. I have struggled in more people's oppression contexts who are not Black over the past 53 years than I have in decidedly Black struggles. And so attitudinally, I don't have any more energy or compassion for someone who can't see that what you just said at the very beginning, that Israel is a blight on, if not the world, the Middle East. The United States is a blight on the world, and Israel is a extension of that blight. And so much in the Middle East would be restabilized if Israel did not exist. But that restabilization would not do anything essential for the liberation of Black people. And I did a 6-hour Afro-pessimist workshop for 35 activists / leaders of Black Lives Matter from Pennsylvania, New York City, and New Jersey back in 2016. This was at actually the Audubon Ballroom, which is now the Malcolm X Shabazz Foundation. And in that 6-hour workshop, the Black Lives Matter people talked to me about a sojourn they took to Palestine for 2 weeks, in which they were going with this whole idea that Ferguson is Palestine. And before they went, they had asked the Palestinians in Gaza if they could meet, and Ramallah, if they could meet Black Palestinians. And they were told yes. And when they got there, they were redirected for almost 10 days away from meeting any Black Palestinians. And when they finally put their foot down and insisted that they do that, they had one-on-ones with Black Palestinians who talked about the structural feeling of anti-Blackness that they experience in a community that's being bombed every day by the Israelis, okay? They didn't talk about Israeli anti-Blackness. They talked about Palestinian anti-Blackness. I had the same experience when I spent 6 weeks in Cuba, you know, and this is, and I'm really sick and tired of people, you know, and what I mean by that is I was with Medea Benjamin's group, Global Exchange, in Cuba for 6 weeks. And we were 13 Americans, 3 of us Black, and we were paired with 2 young communists. And we went all around the island together for that period. And we met with government officials and went to hospitals. It was a groovy experience. And then at one point, the Black Cubans said, we would like a session with the Black Americans, just the 3 Black Americans. And so 3 Black Americans met with about 8 Black Cubans out of that 26 group of Black Cubans. And the white people from the United States, the 10 white people, were like, okay, cool. We'll go on a field trip for a day. So y'all can have the crib. We lived in this big house in Verdado, which was a rich neighborhood that had been subdivided for poor people. But the white Cubans were like, what the hell is going on? We're all communists here. We're all, you know, and to make matters even worse, this is why psychoanalysis is so important to Afro-pessimism, because the force of the unconscious is what you described to me in your opening remarks. And the force of the unconscious actually doesn't have any relational dynamic to it. The force of the unconscious was such that these 3 Black Americans, one of them was fluent in Spanish. Another one was taking intermediate Spanish. I was taking beginning Spanish, okay? But because I was the oldest, I guess, I don't know, or maybe the darkest, I don't know. But the white Cubans vamped on me and demanded that I come to some kind of luncheon tribunal with them where they accused me of fomenting racial divisions on the island. This is a global phenomenon where these people feel victimized by our critique of their capacities to be, and often of how they use their capacities. And I'm very sorry. Afro-pessimism is about them. It is not to them. There's been too many hundreds of years of Ubuntu where we have said, okay, how are you feeling about this? How are you experiencing this? Okay, I don't give a rat's ass anymore. So in that regard, they're right. But in terms of the analytic, they're absolutely wrong, because I've done nothing but solidarity work throughout my whole goddamn life.
So what about also the specific criticism that Afro-pessimism dismisses the Black liberation movement, all of the work, all of the George Jackson work, all of the BLA work, all of the, you know, Asada, etc. And then even this other thing, by the way, you don't have to respond to this. This is up to you. But I forgot to mention that the reason I eventually took down the Lewis Gordon video, which is I think the only video I've ever willfully took down. By the way, my bad. Please forgive me, everybody. Just real quick, the remix show from Thursday, a couple people have asked about it. Google took it down. YouTube took it down. Alphabet took it down. And I suspect it was because of the sort of naturalist discussion around responses to COVID. And even though I have already said I am vaccinated and I'm on the side of the people I interviewed the other day, the medical practitioners that encourage us to get vaccinated, I am not in favor of censorship. So I'm not cool that they took our shit down. I am not cool that they took our video down, even if I disagree with the particular message in the video. But that's what happened, by the way. The reason I'm bringing that up here, Frank, is because I took down, the only time I willfully took down a video that I can think of, at least, is the Lewis Gordon video. Because, not because he disagreed with you, but because he insinuated that your story about your experience in South Africa was not true. And when I asked him to come back on I felt like after the interview, I thought, man, I let that go. I felt uncomfortable. So I reached back out to him and said, would you come back on and either lay out your evidence or, you know, take it back or whatever? He basically said no. Long story short, he said no. So I took the video down. So that's why I just
yeah, I hear you.
It didn't sit right with me. If you have evidence that Frank is lying, then say it. Otherwise, I don't think it's fair to disparage the argument by suggesting his personal story is not true when you have no evidence to say it. I should have checked it at the moment when it happened. I didn't, and then so I anyway tried to correct it coming back, and he didn't want to engage going further than that. So
you know what? That's okay, because I will tell you this: I was hired and fired almost on the same day in 2005 at the University of California, Irvine, because a cat named David Theo Goldberg, who's a white South African, said the very same thing about me and put that shit in the dean's ear. And then she rescinded my provisional hire based upon the fact that I was being called Jason Blair in advance, the dude who made up stories a long time ago. And what happened was, thank you very much to Professor Joy James, because I had made $20,000 the year before as a graduate student. Okay, I'm not anywhere near that low now. Okay, and I didn't have the money to pursue that. And Joy James loaned me $2,000 to get a lawyer to sue the University of California, Irvine, and my wife, Anita Wilkins, who was not my wife at the time, was on sabbatical in South Africa in 1992. And in her travel journals that she has from all over the world, she has a very detailed description of a meeting where Nadine Gordimer, the Nobel laureate, had nominated me to take her place at the annual convention of the Congress of South African Writers on the executive board. And there were 100 delegates, and I won by 99 votes. Then an ANC official in the government of Pretoria wrote a letter about my participation. And the other thing that they said I was lying about was that they said, Samuel Jackson never performed your work at the Negro Ensemble in 1988, okay, which was actually on HBO. So I have experienced this for almost 20 years now, and it's nothing new. I think that, you know, I went to South Africa. There are 100 Black people living there. No, 100 Americans living there. Living permanently there when I went, and most of them were doing stuff for either the State Department or USAID or NGOs, and I joined the ANC, you know, and so I'm happy about that. And there are people who have actually supported my claims. I've documented verification of all that, you know. Go ahead. I just had to get
no,
that
I mean,
out.
it's cool. I appreciate that. I was just saying, you know, the other thing I'm on the record is saying, by the way, on that issue, just for the record again, is that look, I couldn't prove one way or another, and I ultimately don't care. And you know, if you know what you did politically with Incognegro was enough for me. So if anyway, that's where my bias is. That the argument you lay out in there, the history you draw out in there, the views of the struggle in South Africa that you put on that. I'm like, you know, to me, I don't mean to disrespect your real life and what you're saying about your real life. I'm just saying, even if it wasn't true, I wouldn't get it's damn difference. But because my point is, let's talk about what he's saying and politically, and that's ultimately where. So the last point before we get to by the way, your critics would also say that, in terms of your point about Soros, that in fact, because Lewis Gordon in another video I saw did make this point, that your work is being used to destroy the debate scene for Black youth. So when you say Soros is the one putting it there, a lot of people would say, so that's evidence right there, because Soros is seen by a lot, including myself, as not a positive influence on certainly Black radical struggle. So
what I just said as with the tone of irony. If
I hear you.
If George Soros and I think we got to say it very clearly without being ironic. If George Soros and I sat down we could not agree on lunch. He's just a dirty liberal-ass capitalist to me. He did something accidentally, like a good liberal. He tried to help some Negroes in the ghetto form debate camps. They picked up the work and began it. So here's what I think people are pissed off about. Afro-pessimism has one addressee, which is Black people who are sick and tired. It doesn't have three addressees, such as Native Americans, Black people, Palestinians, Latinx immigrants. It has one addressee. Now, anybody can read it because it's in English, but it is not written to anybody. It is only written to Black people who are ready to set it off, or interested in setting it off, or privately disturbed by what they're going through in life, and they can't say it publicly. And I think that what people say is, you should be writing to a wide range of people. You should be writing to a wide range of cognitive perceptions. And I just say no, absolutely.
Well, it's also I mean, it's also that it's also not you are said to be writing to an academic intelligentsia, so to speak. That when you're saying you're writing to Black audiences, it's not all Black audiences.
Yeah, but I would say two things. One, this book changes the paradigm, or that this is a trade book. But I would also say that people have to really pay close attention to what they're saying. We have suffered slings and arrows in the academy for trying to get this out. Okay, it has not been well received in the academy. That's number one. Number two, what people who say that are not actually getting to is the fact that I've been to personally Black community centers in Los Angeles, Black community centers in Oakland, Black community centers in Black Montreal, Black community centers in Vienna, Austria, where semi-degreed and undegreed people are reading early Afro-pessimism and understanding that the energy and the affect is with them, and that the only thing that they have to get over is like John Coltrane getting over the instrument, is the words and the language. I worked in Soweto with kids who were going home and going to the United Nations Food Bank and bringing bags of grain to their homes, and then coming back to school in a place called Pimville, a part of Soweto, where we would have Antonio Gramsci reading groups, okay? And you know how hard that language is, okay? And all those kids brought a thesaurus, and we sat around and we got through it, okay? So all those people who are talking this smack is really, it's just their way of degrading what we're doing without looking at the hardcore evidence. There are people in the ghettos who are reading this work before this book came out.
Well, I've said some of the trouble you've caused me. One of the good things you caused by especially this visit this morning or this afternoon is that my brother, I'm just seeing it and I'm late to it, so I'll get the response to you shortly. But shout out to Luke Stewart, also at WPFW, whose Radical Jazz listening group is checking this out and looking to extend the conversation in their group beyond today. So I appreciate that, and they're very excited for this discussion. So I appreciate that in them, and Luke in particular, a real good brother over there at PFW. So anyway, so thanks for that, Frank. It gave Luke an excuse to reach out to me after some time. That's what's up. One more thing I did want to ask you, when I was doing not all the reading, let me rephrase that. When I was trying to do some of the reading of the criticism, so that to address what I thought was right, what Lewis Gordon said to me, at least for me, like I had not really read that much of it. One of the things I saw was that that piece where Orlando Patterson is quoted in the Times as sort of dismissing your take on his social death analysis. Did you ever respond to that, or did you have any thoughts on that, or does that mean anything, or how, or what do you do with that?
First of all, I thank Orlando Patterson for a groundbreaking work, Slavery and Social Death. I mean, there are certain books that are out there that we could not have formulated this analysis of Black suffering. That's all it is. It's an analysis of Black suffering. It is not a blueprint of what to do about that suffering. It is not a historical kind of account of that suffering. It is not a sociological intervention of that suffering. It's an analytic. It's like looking at a piece on the chessboard that's a queen, and looking at another piece on the chessboard that's a pawn, and saying, before anything happens, what is the capacity of the queen, and what is the capacity of the pawn? That's all we're doing, okay? And so I think that there are people who are alive and dead who intend to do more in their work. And we have taken this little nugget from their work to expand our project, and they don't like it. I mean, I think I've heard through the grapevine that Hortense Spillers has had some issues, and we could not be anywhere and anything without her work. I know that Frantz Fanon, who is a humanist, is rolling around in his grave every time we mobilize him. And the way I say to that is that, well, Fanon, you know, wait for David Marriott to die. And when David Marriott dies and gets to heaven, he will teach you how to read your work a little bit better, okay?
Oh, damn.
And
but you can see why people would be like, Frank, come on, man. That sounds... When my crew dies, we're gonna get there and tell Fanon how to better read his own work. That's gangster.
Yeah, it is. But the reason I say that is because so many Black writers, me included, although I'm like this in person, but not like this on the page, so many Black writers are so traumatized by the comprehensive scope of Black suffering as they look at it, that by the time they get to what I would call metaphorically the end of the book, they say, how can I put some relief in this book? How can I put some redemption? How can I put some hope? As opposed to saying, hey, I'm going to cut it off right here and let Black people in the streets figure out what to do with that. That's why I think there's a hope in Afro-pessimism, because I believe Afro-pessimism does something for revolution, which frees the imagination of Black people to the point where you can look at yourself and engage your imagination without having to ask yourself, how is my desire going to affect the non-Black person next to me? No, I'm for solidarity, but it's not a two-way street. It is, this is where okay, I'm gonna get gangster on you, right? Okay, because it is not a two-way street. It is incumbent upon them to figure out how they can be in solidarity with Black people, not incumbent upon us to figure out how we can be in solidarity with them. And it's precisely because, as I said in the opening chapter of this book, that the unconscious of the Palestinian is structured by the same anti-Blackness as the unconscious of the Israeli. It just so happens that economically and territorially, the Palestinian is suffering. So provisionally, we're down with him, her, or them until they stabilize something. But once they stabilize something, we're going to have to destroy what they've actually created.
So,
precisely because their capacity to be is dependent upon our ongoing destruction of our capacity to be. Now, that's an argument. It's not a sentiment.
Now, there are two, if I remember correctly in your book, there are two stories you tell that address this point. One, so if you could, because this is so quickly, I agree. Reading Afro-pessimism, I enjoyed it. I'm not going to say I understand everything. I'm not going to say I agree with everything, but I enjoyed it. And it was not the I guess the intellectual heavy lift that some of your other works have been. Incognito notwithstanding, you took me back to that. So I appreciate that. You made it easy for some of us, or whatever you had to do. I appreciated that. But there are these two stories. One where you're sitting with the Palestinian, and he makes the comment about the Ethiopian Jew, which if I'm understanding if I understood it, you might want to maybe quickly allude to here. And then the other one about, oh, now I'm forgetting the details about it was one of them a Sudanese. They got into a fight, and then oh man,
The Palestinians
I'll look for it.
Fought with the Kuwaitis.
That's what it was. That's
Yeah,
what it was.
Yeah.
But in each case, in each of these stories, they kind of tell they explain the point that you're making about the lack of a two-way street to blackness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, let's be very clear. And this is another controversial point. What is blackness? Some people, and I mean, what are we trying to say here about the black as a position? We're not saying that blackness is devoid of all of the cultural and linguistic accoutrement that comes, say, from that even someone that I have issues with, like Ron Karenga, would bring up, or comes from Pan-Africanism. We're not dismissing that. We're actually asking the question that Fanon asks in the opening chapter of The Wretched of the Earth. He says, the native does not always tell the truth. The native is the truth. And then he says, what is the native the truth of? The native is the truth of the settler's undoing. And what he means by that, he doesn't mean, how do Algerians think about themselves? How do Algerians feel about occupation? How do Algerians feel about communism? How do Algerians feel about Islam? He simply means that there has been a structural wrong done to Algerians, and they embody that in their corporeal reality, in their bodies. And if you were to right that wrong, then the category of the settler and the native would be destroyed, and we'd be into a new world. And that's all we're saying. That's all we're saying, is that anti-blackness is the embodiment. Blackness is many, many things. But the one thing that is the truth of it at the core, not the totality, the truth, is that it is the embodiment of a kind of violence and positioning that cannot be reconciled, cannot be analogized with the violence that is suffered by other kinds of people. That's an argument. We get that argument by extending and distending the calculus of Fanon, by extending and distending the calculus of Orlando Patterson. Orlando Patterson has said, people, stop thinking about slavery as a historical event. People, stop thinking about slavery as people chopping cotton. People, stop thinking about slavery as people in chains and whips. Think of slavery the way Marx thought of capitalism, as a relational dynamic. And that was a brilliant breakthrough. The only problem is that he says that everyone was at some point not a slave and then became a slave. And what we're arguing is that Black comes into being through the vamping on East Africa by Arabs, Moroccan Jews, Chinese, Iranians, Iraqis, and East Indians. That Black doesn't exist before a global consensus that Africa is a place of slaves. What exists before Black is Ashanti, Buganda, Maasai, Kikuyu, okay? So what we have argued is that Black is essentially a paradigm, just like worker is not a cultural position. Worker is a paradigm. There are workers who speak Spanish. There are workers who speak Swedish. There are workers who are gay. There are workers who are straight. Those are cultural identities. And we're arguing, okay, y'all don't like that? Show us Black before social death. Just show us. Just show us. Because you know what? I'd like to go away somewhere to the Mediterranean and be a poet and study oceanography. I don't want to do this shit, okay? But but there's an essential dynamic of suffering, which is not only our suffering, but it is necessary for everybody else to formulate who they are. And that's what I was saying anecdotally with the Palestinian. He's grieving about a cat who is his cousin, who's making a bomb in a basement in Ramallah. I'm grieving next to him because I'm down with that cause. It's 1988. There's no Afro-pessimism. I'm just a straight up head internationalist Marxist, right? And all of a sudden, he starts telling stories about Israeli occupation. And he says, it is so humiliating to get at a checkpoint and they just run their hands over you, and they run their hands, his words, over our women, right? Okay. And I'm like, yeah, right on. You know, he says, but you know what the most humiliating thing is? When an Ethiopian Jew runs his hands over you. Okay, that says to me, it is a symptomatic truth that in the collective unconscious of everyone in the world, the Black exists as a threat. That's just, you know, I can prove that. I can.
So why do you think he was saying that to you, though?
He wasn't saying it to me. He was saying it to the sky. He was. What I'm trying to say is that he was in a condition of crying, grieving. We were sitting on a hill overlooking downtown Minneapolis, and he was speaking out. I didn't have to be there. It was a psychoanalytic moment. It was the force of his. If he was looking at me and conversing with me, he would not have said that.
See, but this is where I personally, and I think beyond, you know, me, keep running into issues. So when I read your work and I'm sitting and I'm reading Afro-pessimism, I'm enjoying it, and I'm not finding, I mean, whatever I might disagree with, I don't even know exactly how I would phrase it or what it would be, but it would certainly not be in sort of not recognizing the stories that you share, for instance. In other words, when you lay out those stories, they're reminiscent of so many of my own. I'm sure anybody else's, any number of other Black people would have experienced versions of this. And I'm gonna get to the mixed question before we leave. Don't worry, I'm gonna get to that. But for instance, I got into an argument in an email chain where it was presented to a group of Black radicals, your recent article in The Nation magazine, and where you outline sort of what you say in Afro-pessimism is what you call the meta theory, the critical project, by deploying Blackness as a lens of interpretation, which interrogates the unspoken assumptive logic of Marxism, post-colonialism, psychoanalysis, and feminism through rigorous theoretical consideration of their properties and assumptive logic, et cetera, and so forth. My point is, you put that on display in that Nation article. And one of the things that, and as I said, I think to you in an email, was that the first thing that, not that I disagree with anything you said in the article, other than that it was in the Nation, and that this is part of what is used in the criticism of your work in some circles. So, for instance, as I was saying a moment ago about George Soros wouldn't pick, a Black Marxist, a Marxist-Leninist, Black liberation, text to distribute. The Nation magazine isn't publishing many overtly radical, Black Marxists and militants of that nature. Medea Benjamin isn't hanging out with a lot of these same folks either. So when your name and work comes up in association with these spaces, it seems, on some level, people would say, and this is where I wanted to go with this next question, is that as a stereotypically traditional, or coming out of the stereotypical traditional lineage of cultural nationalism and race first analysis, wouldn't it be easier, and isn't it often easier for white liberals in particular to associate themselves with that than anything Black and radically materialist? So in other words, what I also think is just a criticism of your work that goes unsaid is that you're offering what for many is, simply put, a race first analysis that many people don't think is expansive enough or radical enough. Anyway, please respond to any of that if you would.
I don't know. What do people want me to be? You know, slothful and hand out leaflets on the fucking corner? I mean,
what I think they would want to say is, shouldn't we all acknowledge when even if it's not our intent, that our work is being recognized, appreciated, or even misused by people who would be well-funded and be in position to well-fund us? Shouldn't we be critical of that?
I am. I have been. I continue to be. I mean, look, I operate in a vertically integrated range of spaces. I operate in Research One institutions, and like I put to before, I operate in community centers in the inner city. Incognito, you know, was slated for a $50,000 advance in 2006 by Simon & Schuster, and the publisher just came down to the editorial room within hours of them supposed to fax me the contract and said, I haven't been down here in 30 years, but I'm telling you, you're not publishing this book. I'm not giving you a reason why. HarperCollins was going to give me $35,000. And the sales force came the day that we were supposed to do the deal and said, we're not bringing this shit to our buyers at Barnes and Noble. You know, at Beacon Press, they said, take out all the shit dealing with white women and we'll publish this, you know, for $7,500. Then it went dormant for 2 years because I had spent the advance from Beacon, and then South End Press, which had become Black through Asha Tal and Jocelyn Burrell, they published it, and they said, you know, we can only give you, we only give $1,500 to like Bell Hooks and Noam Chomsky. We give you $500 for this. I said, we got a bigger problem. I don't own my book. Okay, you got to get $4,000 over to Beacon before, and they paid, those Black women paid the money, and they upped it to $1,500. And I hit the phones for 3 months in the spring of 2008, and I would, for my stockbroker, I would dial 100 bookshops a day, get 30 contacts, make 3 deals, and I got a book tour, and then Jocelyn Burrell put in $4,000 for me to come to New York, and that's partly how that whole thing, the East Coast, How I Met You. So what I'm trying to say is that I am not a darling of the establishment, okay? It's largely because Afro-pessimism has taken off in the Black community. What people don't see is that from 2006 until 2018, this was largely an underground movement where we were working only in Black spaces. It's only now, with the death of George Floyd, which came 2 years after I got the contract, and the fact that Afro-pessimism picked up as a trade book, that all these people who forgot, these terrains who forgot how they treated me in the past are coming back. You know, so I really think that that's an unsophisticated critique, that somehow I live in these rarefied spaces and where I'm eating caviar with the heads of state and publishing houses. It's just, I'm vertically integrated in my interactions, and I've suffered a lot and had to claw my way to where I'm at. And I make no apologies for that.
No, right on. Fair enough. So what is the biggest thing that I struggle with in Afro-pessimism is this master slave piece. Like, how, never mind, you're criticized for your wife, I'm criticized for my mother. Never mind all of these relationships that we have, willfully or not, with white folks. How is it that this master slave thing is so permanent? And then how could you engage on any level with white folks if from your understanding and their perspective, all we can ever be is enslaved or a slave?
Well, I don't. The last question is a question that haunts me day and night, but I refuse to answer it, because if I answered it, I would be, having said that, and now I'm going to get a little theoretical, which goes back to the other work. What constitutes a relational dynamic? And the essence of what constitutes a relational dynamic is that I am not Black. Okay, and so to be able to form relations is to not be Black. That doesn't mean that Black people don't desire relations, don't have what Jared Sexton, who actually, had he not asked the question, what if we looked at the essential antagonism through anti-Blackness in 99, 2000, we wouldn't be here today. I mean, he asked that question in a reading group. It doesn't mean that in the other parts of the Black psyche, there's not a desire to be a relational being. There's not a desire to have violence and aggression fomented against us for contingencies, for reasons. One desires all of that. What we're saying is that if that were possible for Black people, then it would not be possible for anybody else. To know who I am in the world as a human being, I have to know that I am not Black. That is a basic extension of a analytic that undergirds psychoanalysis, which is called semiotics. I won't get all into it, but it suggests that words and concepts do not have organic relationships to the thing. If I say to my students, what is this? And they say, this is a book. And I say, okay, now book me for a crime. And they throw it at me, then they would not be able to cross the bar of metaphor. In other words, words are constantly sliding, and the only way they get meaning, the only way one gets meaning in one's life is in contradistinction to someone else. The key part here is that the N word and the Black body has no transformative capacity. Now, this is a controversial point, and we're not going to have a way of backing it up in the short time that we have, but the transformational capacity of Blackness comes through Blackness's capacity to move towards the end of the world, to a new dynamic which cannot be imagined. This is what makes, and I will stand by this, not just because I've written analytic articles about it, but because just like my Palestinian friend, everyone understands that Blackness is a threat without an idea. Fanon wrote this. He says to Sartre, the Jew is a threat conceptually. One has to wait to see if they act like a Jew, if they perform Jewishness. The Black is a threat corporally, the body, not the ideas. This is why I try to get across to the nation piece. And Ehrlichman said it to Nixon, right? We are not against Black people's ideas. Black people don't have any ideas. I don't mean we don't have ideas. What I mean is we don't have any auditors. And that's what makes Black people crazy, thinking that somebody's listening, somebody can hear, somebody will judge me for my actions. My Palestinian friend, the unconscious doesn't allow that to happen. And I'm sorry if that hurts people. It hurts me too. But we have spent 20 years carefully analyzing that dynamic, and nobody has come up with an analytic rebuttal to that. They've all come up with, this hurts solidarity, this makes me feel bad, this is a way of being race first. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm no, I'm just not able, I won't deal with people's emotional problems. I got my own.
In fact, you say if, as Afro-pessimism argues, Blacks are not human subjects, but are instead structurally inert props, implements for the execution of white and non-Black fantasies and sadomasochistic pleasures, then this also means that at a higher level of abstraction, the claims of universal humanity that the above theories all subscribe to are hobbled by a meta aporia, a contradiction that manifests whenever one looks seriously at the structure of Black suffering in comparison to the presumed universal structure of all sentient beings. And you say this in response to your explanation as to why Marxism, or your quick summary as to why Marxism, post-colonialism, psychoanalysis, and feminism are ultimately insufficient in explaining or resolving the problem. Why isn't Afro-pessimism? By the way, just very quickly, shout out to Joy James. You mentioned her, and I forgot to just come back and double down on that. Much respect to Dr. Joy James. And you used the analogy earlier of the queen and the pawn, that about what is possible for each, and to understand the sort of the world that a challenge to Blackness ultimately leads to the end of. We have to appreciate, or at least understand, what are supposed to be the potentials of each. But again, the critics of your work would often argue that you don't give room to recognize, to borrow your analogy, that in chess the pawn can become a queen. That transformation, that radical transformation, seems to be lost in your work. Now, again, as I said, I've never read your work, and certainly in the interviews we've done, I don't know how many, I mean, I don't know, approaching, I don't know, however many at this point, but I've never walked away feeling anything but inspired to the most radical political behavior. Yet, again, it is persistent, and and maybe it's because the term pessimism is in the title, but that many take this away. Again, even reading this most recent work, which is in I guess in a part 2, another memoir of sorts. I don't know, a different part of your life. There's nothing in there that says we can't, that I take meaning we can't struggle, we can't fight, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. Anyway, but
yeah, well, okay. So very quickly, pessimism is not, in Afro-pessimism, and this is, I understand how people get this wrong because we haven't actually come out explicitly, and we haven't had time, to answer, because there's more slings and arrows coming at us than people saying, oh, hey, check this out. Anyway, pessimism is not meant to connote an emotional dispensation. Pessimism is meant to connote an attitude towards the emancipatory horizon of Marxism, feminism, post-colonialism, and psychoanalysis. In other words, it's really like hijacking a phrase from Antonio Gramsci, who says, I have a pessimism of the intellect and an optimism of the will. By that he means I have a pessimism of the bourgeois economists and the social democrats who analyze Italy's problems in a half-assed way, but I have an optimism of the factory workers in Turin who are occupying the factories. So we have a pessimism of the capacity of Marxism, feminism, psychoanalysis, and post-colonialism to think through the essence of Black suffering. It's a pessimism of their intellectual projects. We have an optimism of Black people's capacity to move, to set it off. Okay, so that's one thing. Getting back to the pawn queen thing. Okay, so my own work in particular, most Afro-pessimism is weighted towards an analysis of capacity, even though it does a lot of other things in the work itself. Jared Sexton's work he's basically saying in amalgamation schemes, look, I have a white mother and a Black father. However, I know in this movement, whether you take a broadside from a political movement or an academic book from some mixed race person who's writing about people always say, if everybody mixed races and we were just all blending together, the world would be better. Whether it's that shit or something else, he says, what is at the core of that statement? What is at the core of that statement? The core of that statement is an anxiety about Black. And he says, everywhere I look in biracial literature, I see an anxiety about Black. I say in Palestine, I don't say Palestinians aren't suffering from Israelis. What I see is an anxiety about Black. I see it in Tel Aviv. I see it in Gaza. In Cuba, the best country in the world, I see an anxiety about Black. An anxiety about Black. Without an anxiety about Black, people could not exist in their relational dynamics. Full stop. Without that anxiety, there could be no white families, there could be no white nations, there could be no Native American families. An anxiety about Blackness is like the grain of sand around which the mucus forms to create being. That is an argument which we have documented. In fact, we're not the first people to document that. Fanon documents that, but he says something that we disagree with. He says, by talking it through, you can get beyond that. No.
You don't know.
No. By ending the world, you can get beyond that. And you can't even know what's beyond that. You can't, because people don't, the unconscious doesn't speak. You don't speak the unconscious. It speaks you. The only thing you speak is your preconscious, but there's another engine inside of you that's generating all the things that you do, and it's generating them in symptomatic gestures, symptomatic actions, okay? You cannot teach the unconscious. It is an unteachable part of the brain. It can be traumatized, it can be destroyed, it's not that it cannot be changed, but it cannot be changed through dialogue. Okay, now the pawn queen thing very quickly. What I did a very quick gloss of this before. I said that what I'm most interested in putting down tracks of before I die is an analytic of embodied capacity, okay? Because I think there's too much, especially in the Anglo-American world. I've taught all over the world. And the Anglo-American world is the worst world for thinking theoretically, because British and American people think about what they can see and touch, and they develop their theories from that. You cannot understand a relational dynamic based upon empiricism and observation. You have to go very much deeper, which is why it's easier, ironically, for me to teach Germans, fascist-ass Germans, in grad school than it is to teach Americans, because they don't need the tactile evidence of their experience to understand what's going on, okay? So I said that a pawn has a certain capacity. It can move 2 spaces when it first starts, and then 1 diagonally. A queen has a certain capacity. She can move diagonally across the board and vertically and horizontally across the board. So those are capacities that are different. And you said to me that in the game of chess, the pawn can actually, in some moves, become a queen. I agree with you, but that's not the end of our analysis. Our analysis then says, how do we understand the spatial terrain on which the pawn and the queen operate? So it's both the temporal terrain, what can a pawn and a queen do over time, and what is the space? And the spatial terrain is that it goes like this. The queen can move all kinds of ways, but one thing she cannot do, she cannot jump off the chessboard, move around to the back, and attack the king on the other side from the back. Your queen ass has to stay on the chessboard in the world, okay? And so this is the deepening of the analysis, because from our point of view, the chessboard is the world spatially, and the pieces are the world spatially and temporally. And what we were saying is that there's another piece, and it's called the checkers piece, which has no place in the world of chess. It is, and you know that it has no place in the world of chess. You know that a checkers, what is a queen ultimately? She's not a pawn, she's not a rook, she's not a bishop, but essentially, how are they all chess pieces? Which is to say, how are they all human beings? Because they are not a checkers piece. They are in the world. They have varying degrees of relational power, but they're in the world of chess. The checkers piece is important is essential because it helps them understand what their world is. And what I'm saying is Black people are the checkers piece. They're not in the world, they're not of the world, but they are necessary if the world is to know who they are and what their boundaries are. We are an essential embodiment for everybody else to understand I am alive because I'm not Black.
So then you have this, if I'm not mistaken, in Afro-pessimism, this is your only real exploration of mixed race, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm even forgetting here, I clipped it here in my notes, but I don't even have here who the she is that I'm talking about. But the part I'm quoting here, you said she carried with her the ensemble of dilemmas that seems to afflict mixed race children into adulthood, a fear of slipping into the darkness of their Black side, and without ever having to ascend to the light of white redemption. And for my part, I resented the fact that she was born with this crisis and I was not. A crisis in which I, as a dark-skinned person with no whiteness in my features, was the living, breathing image of the hell into which she could descend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having all kinds of personal reactions to that. I don't know how well it captures my own experience. I don't know if I should feel a certain kind of way about that. But anyway, so my first reaction was I've never thought of of my potential Blackness or the descent into Blackness as hell. I always thought of it and still do as redemptive itself. But I know you're not talking about me or to me, but that was my reaction. I had a very problem. I was like, hold up, Frank. Hold up now. Anyway, but go ahead, man. Say something else about that if you will. What does that mean?
Well, actually, I hope, since this is a trade book for the general public, there are not little footnote numbers at the end of every little thing I say. And there are footnotes at the back, which are embedded through, like if you read a phrase that you don't know where it's coming from, you could turn to the back and perhaps you will see where that phrase comes from. I hope I didn't just plagiarize, but really that comes from Black Skin, White Mass, the woman of color and the white man. And, I would agree with you partially, Jared. I want us to be buddies.
Pun intended. That's funny. Go ahead, man.
But in other words, I say that you're saying that Blackness is an enabling universe for you, not a descent into the abyss. I would argue that you are telling the truth at the level of pre-conscious. But if I put you on the couch for 3 years and you knew that nothing that you said was going to be repeated and you just talked and talked and talked, I think we would find some contradictions, not just in you, but in me also, in the unconscious. In other words, and this is why I said at the very beginning of our show that when Fanon goes to heaven, he needs to meet David Marriott and say, hey, dude, how can I reread my own work without all the sentimentality? Because what David Marriott is suggesting is that one of the constituent elements of suffering as a Black person is to have not just a mind that is consciously aware of aggressivity from the outside, but to have an unconscious mind that is constantly tormented by a dual demand, the demand to destroy one's imago or guard itself against it. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is that our conscious mind and our unconscious mind in relation to Blackness is at odds with each other, that my Palestinian friend is not just some Palestinian dude who hates Black, that I am too, that in my unconscious, Blackness presents anxiety. Now, how I deal with that anxiety can be highly progressive, but I do not believe that there's any Black person walking around who has no anxiety about about being Black and no need to destroy themselves as an image in their unconscious mind. I think that Fanon has proven that by symptomatically following my Capacia in that chapter, in this moment when, he basically says, look, how do I know I'm in a world? And he doesn't mean how do I know I say I'm in a world. He's not talking about what you say about yourself. He's talking about how does your unconscious know you're in a world? Your unconscious knows you're in a world by the level of your proximity to whiteness. When Maya Capacia is going through all this anxiety and about, she's got this French general officer lover she's fathered a child. He's fathered a child through her. The dude won't accept the child. She wants to go to the social club in Port-au-Prince, where the French hang out. She's in love with this dude. He won't bring her to the social club. He finally brings her, and the white women treat her like shit, and she's going through all this stuff, and then Fanon is saying, what's going on here? And he looks at her symptomatic gestures. He doesn't ask her, hey, what do you think about yourself? Okay, because what's she gonna say? I am a Black woman who's an anti-Black racist and I hate myself to bits. Okay, no, okay, come on now, let's be for real. Okay, he says, oh, well, here's something. In grade school, she took an iMWiL from her desk, and a dude she was mad at, and she poured all the ink on top of his head. She's a laundress, and she rubs her knuckles to the bone, making sure the sheets that she washes with her hands are just perfectly white, and she brags about how white she gets the sheet. He's reading her symptomatic gestures and like breadcrumbs back to grandmother's house and saying, I see at the core of her unconscious a desire of hallucinatory whitening to turn white or disappear. Boom. Then one day she hears a story, and the story is that her grandfather, who's a Black Martinican, had her mother through a white Canadian woman, which she never knew. And all of a sudden, her bodily chemistry changes. She's able to smile again because this is a white woman with a Black man. It's a gift. Her mother is a gift. Not her mother was a child of a Black woman with a white man. That would be a baby made in the bushes. No, the white woman is a gift, okay? And she can now move through the world with with less turmoil in the stomach, with a smile on her face, okay? This is a description of a structural dynamic that is not singular to Maya Capacia. Marriott is saying this is the unconscious. There's no such thing as a Black unconscious that is not tormented by its own imago. Now, what Fanon is saying is that, and he doesn't say it very well in Black Skin, White Mask, because he's writing this book with his wife, right? He's dictating this book, she's typing it, he's trying not to offend her because
his white wife, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. Yeah. He's trying not to offend her. Oh, that's deep. Okay.
But he's also, and I'm not condemning him for this, I understand that sentiment perfectly. But he's also trying to say, you and I are going to have this great marriage where we're not in an antagonistic dynamic if we harness the tools of the talking cure to get beyond where we are. And you know what happens? Every chapter ends in a cul-de-sac, okay? Because what he runs up against is that they're not of the same species. She's the master, he's the slave. She's the human, he's the Black. And he's so much a victim of the time. He's so much suffering from a terminal disease that I call clientitis, where psychoanalysis is his client, that he believes that something of an essential relation can happen between me and her. So he dictates all this evidence, then he gets there, oh shit, where am I at? And then he cuts it off. We have to read his own book as a form of tormented suffering.
So all I'm going to say is that I would be the exception that proves the rule, and I would fuck up that couch. But that is not an argument against your work. So that's all I'm saying. I just take myself out of that equation and that I put myself in. But that's deep. Listen, so essentially I've gone over with you I've gotten from you what I had hoped to get from so far in this conversation. I want to make sure, I do want to check the chat, which is always dangerous, to see if there are any questions that we can grab real quick. But I also want to make sure that if there's nothing that I've invited you to say about Afro-pessimism, the book, or the idea, the meta theory, broadly speaking, that you would like to say, or a point that you want to elaborate on, please do.
Okay, there's one thing.
Yeah, sure.
An NPR interviewer at National Public Radio in Texas got to the end of the interview, and she did this thing, even though I said from the very beginning, it's pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, it's not an emotional dispensation. Perhaps we should have taken a different name, but Saidiya Hartman gave us this name back in 2002, and we ran with it, and she says, well, is there any joy in Afro-pessimism? And I said, look, there is, but what makes me happy might very well terrify you. And my point is that people who are doing all these ad hominem attacks on me, which is fine, because I live for new enemies, that's great, bring it on. But also understand that what you are doing is making a sentimental response to a deeply analytic set of research books and papers that have been coming out for the past 20 years. You have to understand, ask yourself, why is it that so many Black youth, Black lumpen, are struggling with the vernacular of Afro-pessimism in the way that the 18, 19, and 20-year-old kids that I was teaching Antonio Gramsci to in Pimville, Soweto, after they came back from the United Nations Food Bank? Why are so many Black people on ground struggling with this and why are Black youth in the debate world being energized by this? And I think that what happens is that a lot of Black scholars don't understand that we are not in a privileged position because we have research one tenure track jobs. We are just in a different form of psychic domination, okay? And that all Black speech is coerced speech. Every Black person is in prison, regardless if you're driving a Benz or a Bentley, or if I just made chancellor's professor. I'm very happy about that. That doesn't mean that I'm free. Okay, there are only, it's a great honor. There's 3,000 professors. There's only 50 chancellor's professors. Okay, I didn't get there because the white people.
I've never even heard of this. I don't even know what the hell this is. I haven't even heard of this shit before.
It's a title based upon your distinguished contribution to research. But you know what?
Congratulations. It shows you also how far away from that 50 I am. I never even heard of the damn thing, but I'm just
well, but my point is, I never tried to get it. Okay. The university has always been, I am always a parasite, and the university is my host. I'm a parasite on its resources to do the work that I need to do for expanding the territory of Black knowledge of antagonism. And the last thing I'll say is, I was an adjunct professor once. And I've always spoken the way I speak, whether I have a tenure track job or a part-time job. And there were some people of color professors who had done this human relations workshop at UC Santa Cruz, wanting all the people to come together for their first year students, And one of them said, this isn't just about Black. That statement, whenever people hear that, this isn't just about Black. That's just what Jared Sexton is talking about with these mixed race discourses. I'm not just Black. He's saying, statistically speaking, nobody says, I'm not just white, okay? You, Jared, Ball, the exception to the rule. I'm not gonna make comments on your unconscious. But as soon as we get into these groups, these circles of human relations type groups, for these college students, there's this undertow of shaming that happens for Black students. And I can say this to you because I know from other people that you don't do this. But most academics do this. Like, y'all got to be cool. Y'all got to do this. Y'all got to understand that, it's not just about you, And I felt that going on in the focus group, right? And one of the professors said to the kids, I don't want y'all to just be complaining. Tell us about what makes you happy. You gotta move around the room and tell me one thing that makes you happy. And I watched the torment on these kids' faces as they living in fucking Santa Cruz, okay? One of the most anti-Black places in the world, having to come up with something that made them happy, And when they were having choices, well, let's see the instructors can lead by example. And they said to me, so Frank, what makes you happy? And I said, what makes me happy is when I'm walking down Shattuck Avenue up in Berkeley, and I see all the houses in the Berkeley Hills burning to the ground. That's what makes me happy. And you know what happened? You know what happened? Yeah, just that, what you just did. Those kids bust their gut, okay? And now we were happy, okay? And the fucking administrator and the professors, they had to deal with that. Okay, yeah, that's what makes me happy.
Listen, after one of the video, look, and I was watching, I was again trying to do some homework on the criticism, and I watched a Lewis Gordon discussion with Hortense Spillers. And on the one hand, I was, no disrespect, I admit I didn't understand. It was never clear to me what she was saying, you were saying was a problem.
Yeah.
It was just clear she was saying she had a problem with what you were saying. And I just kept waiting for the explanation, and it was never made clear to me. But one thing that it was in that discussion where Gordon makes the point about the debate scene, and that it's white instructors and white funding that's imposing Afro-pessimism on these unsuspecting Black kids in the ghetto. And that this was destabilizing and going to have an untold negative impact. And the first thing I thought of, honestly, was how does he know that? I don't even know how you would assess that.
Exactly.
But I did reach out, honestly. But I reached out to a good friend of mine who comes out of that scene and knows it well. And I asked him, to what extent, and sort of what I understood you to be saying is what I understood him to be saying, that yes, it was in many cases that Afro-pessimism was introduced to these Black kids by these white instructors of these debate camps, but that they were doing something very different with it, or taking it on their own and looking to adapt it for their own, in many cases, Black nationalist, race first analysis purposes. So on one hand, I just wanted to say that, but to also ask again, and even some of the questions in the chat are asking in different ways. Is not what you're doing an update or another twist on a race first analysis? In other words, is some of the reaction people are having to you, even maybe just in part, even without engaging your work, a visceral one that they've been having to the so-called Garveyites and the cultural nationalists in other areas for their whole academic or intellectual lives?
Yeah, but Black nationalism, race first, all that, those were movements. This is an analytic lens, and people are doing something with it. You cannot read anywhere in Afro-pessimism, based upon what we've analyzed about anti-Blackness and social death, here's what you should do, boom, 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 boom. That is completely missing, deliberately missing, because how can you talk about the end of the world, okay? We're saying that Black people don't suffer essentially from being poor. Black people don't suffer essentially from being immigrants. Black people don't suffer essentially from being in prison. Black people suffer essentially from a form of violence and accumulation that is based on nothing but their Blackness and the need for in every community, there has to be aggressivity. Why is there aggressivity? Because the hydraulics of repression are necessary for a community to exist. You and I have been speaking English, but we've been speaking through a repression called grammar. If you went off script like you did a tab of LSD, right now, and you started hallucinating, and you started using grammar any way you saw fit, and you broke through the repression of the rules of the social dynamics of language, we could not have a community of relational dynamics here. So what I'm saying is that any pressure on the brain, repression is not a bad word. It's necessary for communities to be. But repression produces aggression, because like little kids doing word games, or like people who want to, you say you cannot sleep with your mother, you cannot sleep with your father, you cannot sleep with horses, okay? And yet, I didn't know this until this grad student came to me from the dark web wanting to do a dissertation on bestiality. There are people who have sex with animals. There are people who have sex with their parents. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the repression of Oedipus, which structures the nuclear family, produces a way of people to have a stable relation with each other, but it cannot guard against the needs of the unconscious to go in all kinds of directions, and that produces aggression. And what Fanon writes is that aggressivity needs a destination. Now, in so-called primitive societies, they have rituals, they wear masks, they burn things in effigies. In the world, the Black is the destination for all aggressivity. We are the destination for all aggressivity. And if you want to know how that works, read chapter 6 of Black and White Mass. He talks about the white woman in the gendered family, the Negro and psychopathology. Now, sorry, go to the last part of your question. I'll be very quick. What was the last?
Oh man, now I don't even remember. What was it?
The debate thing. Yeah.
Oh, the debate part, right? Sorry about that. Wow.
So here's the deal. This is where people need better institutional history and less of this kind of shooting from the hip. Back in about 2008, 2 Black students from your neck of the woods, Towson University, right near DC, simply
closer to Baltimore, to be fair to the region. I don't want to cause any trouble here. I just want to be fair.
It's all East Coast to be outside.
I hear you, right? But just to be fair to the region, I don't want to get
closer to Baltimore.
any more trouble than we're already in. Anyway,
okay.
Yeah.
Two black debaters won a national tournament against Harvard University by simply reading into the record a letter that my wife and I wrote to the faculty of Cabrillo Community College in Incognito. And it basically said, it's not that you are making bad choices in hiring and firing. It's that you have no right to to exist. You have no right to be engaged in the capacity of hiring and firing. And from that, they used that letter to then make the argument that we are not going to answer the debate question pro or con. We are going to say that question is a question that exists for people on a chessboard, to get back to my metaphor, and to say that we are interrogating the right of civil society and citizens to exist, not the things that they do in civil society. And you know what? They won that national debate. Okay, this was not George Soros. This was not white debate coaches. These are 2 Black students who had this idea. Let's use this letter as an anecdote to make a springboard to free us from answering the question and interrogating the right for the question to exist. And they won it, and then it picked off. Okay, now I'm going to say to you that because coaches want to win, some white coaches clicked on to teaching Afro-pessimism. But I have only dealt with one white debate coach, and I've dealt with many debate coaches, and that's a dude named David Peterson, who always instantiated himself in the Black community, okay, with Black debate coaches, being authorized by Black debate coaches. He's now teaching Afro-pessimism in China, okay? And so what I'm trying to say is that, yes, there are a lot of young people. Remember, these kids are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. And they are experimenting with Afro-pessimism on their own terms. And sometimes I've been to some of their tournaments. Sometimes they get it wrong. I don't care. I don't care. That's how I got to where I am, experimenting with existentialism, experimenting with post-colonialism, experimenting with Marxism, hanging out with SDS, Students for Democratic Society in 1970, hanging out with the Panthers. That's what youthful people do. They experiment. And so it is not necessary for me that they deploy Afro-pessimism in their debates to the letter of my analytic apparatus. It is just necessary for me that they engage. I'm just happy that they engage. And you could say to me, not you, but they could, the naysayers could say, well, George Soros is deploying this. You should, just because he has put money into these debate camps, you shouldn't let Afro-pessimism go down that route. You could also say, because W. Norton is not an Afro-pessimist press, I should not have published this book there. But do you know how many people in the world, Black people in the world, who have gotten this book now, who did not get Red, White, and Black, or even Incognito? Okay, so there's no such thing as a Black world. There's no such thing as a Black institutional dynamic. There's no such thing as a Black publishing dynamic. I'm not saying they're not Black published. What I'm trying to say is that we are captive. We are captive. And how we use the tools of captivity is going to vary. I believe in my heart of hearts that I've used those tools with great integrity.
I should also point out two other things quickly. One, if we're doing the making the adjustments to our quote unquote reality, it should never be through LSD, mushrooms only. Let's clarify that point. And then I should also clarify that the person that I reached out to would probably also want me to know, because I think he was one of the people involved with that victory over Harvard. That while it may have taken place through Towson, the participants all come from Baltimore. So I just or were led through Baltimore. So I just want to be clear on that also. Like, again, I'm trying to keep it together regionally. I don't want.
And for me, let me say something on my own behalf. Several years ago, I got lots of calls from white debate coaches, even a high school white debate coach in Chevy Chase, Maryland, right? Mm-hmm. Saying, hey, and I needed money. I don't need money right now. I needed money then, okay? Say, hey, if you come out to Northwestern, if you come out to Michigan State, if you come out to Chevy Chase and do some workshops for our white debate students on Afro-pessimism, we'll pay you some buku cash, I called the crew out in Baltimore, and I said, this is some good money. And they said, no, don't do that. They are training these white kids in Afro-pessimism so that they can beat us.
Beat you, yeah.
and I, to this day, have not accepted one dime from those people.
So this would be part of my response off the record when a lot of people would come, and I don't mean a lot, I don't want to exaggerate, but it feels, a number of people would come to me with their, again, off the record criticisms of my interaction with you. And I would say, but everything, that's the version of Frank that I have to say I'm accustomed to, that I'm aware of. So I don't really, Anyway, this is a question here that we've had you on our airwaves at WPFW. Again, shout out to Katia Stitt and others in conversation with Daruba bin Wahad, and I believe several others coming out of that BLA political prisoner world. But this question here about how does your work support or not the work of the Black Liberation Army, or what so as we started off, I've never understood your work to discourage Black radical political activity. Some of the critics claim that your work does. Here's a direct question about how your work would interact or does or does not interact with the BLA or that history.
The BLA has been so important to me ever since I got back. well, actually before that, because in 1987, Sada's book came out from Zed Publishing in London. And then a year later, in 88, it came out through Lawrence Hill. And I was teaching Asada's work in 87 at the Loft Literary Center, a course called Reading the Memoir for Memoir Writers, okay? That was before I had even before I'd even gone and met Everett Said, okay? So I fundamentally believe that we have to keep, like with my friend Akinale Umoja, we have to keep the BLA front and center, because it's too easy for white radicals to have a kind of fuzzy love affair with the Black Panther Party and not to celebrate, acknowledge, and just say, like you would say to anyone who served in Iraq, right? What I say to all Black Liberation Army soldiers, thank you for your service. So I'm working on a thank you for your service, right?
Move to the front of the plane, please. Move to the front of the line, please.
Exactly. You're in the BLA, you're flying first class, okay? So I have at least 3 highly analytic articles that I've written on the BLA. I spent a year in Germany thinking through the structural dynamic of what it meant to be in a soldier in a liberation armed struggle who is Black compared to someone in the Red Army faction or Bader Meinhof gang. My next book is fiction, and it will engage those themes in some way. And the book after that will probably, if I live that long and get it all together, will probably grow the 3 articles that I published on the Black Liberation Army into a small book in and of itself. I really think that we have to, having been involved in armed struggle in South Africa, I really think it's important that we move from the energy of civil disobedience, and this word that I keep hearing all the time on Amy Goodman, peaceful civil disobedience, and to acknowledge and celebrate people who have picked up the gun against the most horrible institution in the world, the United States of America. Now, if the work is highly theoretical, I won't go into it too deeply, but one of the things that it is also saying, my work on Asada's book, and not just my work, for example, being a chancellor's professor, the dean asked me, can we put your picture on a banner that will hang on lampposts in the School of Humanities at UC Irvine? And on the banner, it'll read, it'll have something to do with your research, which is on the Black Panther Party and its creation in 1966. That's what the communication office asked me. And I came back to them, I said, I really don't write on the Panthers. I write on the Black Liberation Army. And I said, all Black speech is under coercion. I was queasy in my stomach. I see Asada on the wall behind you, and I said, if you want a fair representation of me on this poster, and then you're going to have this like barcode where you put your cell phone up to it and you click on, and it sends you to my research, you're not going to go to research on the Panthers. I do research on the Black Liberation Army. So I think we need to kind of skew the poster for that, and I thought they would come back with me and say, hell no, and but they said yes. And so that's what I've done. I've, against all odds, emotional odds in this horrible county called Orange County, I have used university money to bring Sekou Odenga to campus to speak. Got all kinds of hate mail from the white people. Well, what about a cop killer? Well, he's a cop killer. That's why I brought him.
Hey, I was on hand. I still think to this day one of your coldest lines was when we were and we were live and direct, and you said, I don't hate police violence or police brutality. I hate the police. And that joint, I was like, that's a cold line.
There's a right-wing institute in Arizona that's actually a few days ago sent me that line and said, we found your name in a liberally biased syllabus at Arizona, And can you comment on that? That was years ago. That was almost 20 years ago. And these people, they dig up shit all the time. Anyway, so here's my point. In my book and my articles, there's two things that are going on at the same time. One is a celebration of I could not be where I am as a thinker if Assata, Daruba, what's Herman Bell's other name? No, it's just Herman Bell. Yeah,
Herman Bell. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he had an African, Sekou Denga and Jalil Montekim. You know, when I taught at community college, I made these white students in Santa Cruz write letters to the Black Liberation Army as they were studying the text, you know, and was almost fired for that. So what I'm trying to say is that my capacity to think as clearly and as antagonistically without apology and without giving the United States some corner in my brain, some corner in my writing for its capacity to transform. My unabashed desire and analysis of the need for it to be destroyed could not happen without Assata, you know? Because it couldn't happen with Huey, you know? Huey changed up on me when I was 16 years old, okay? I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, bless his heart and everything, but, you know, he started talking this, you know, I was like a junior in high school. He started this intercommunal bullshit and everything, you know, with his little squeaky ass voice. And I just—
Man, but I like intercommunalism. I think he's right.
I'm sorry. And I will back up on that. I'll back up on that because I don't remember enough about it to actually critique it. What I'm trying to say is that
I hear you.
As a older teenager, watching the debates between Eldridge and Huey, you know, Eldridge from Algeria, and then seeing what was happening in New York, not my analytic understanding was in any way capable, but my energy was mobilized by this entity that was becoming Mutula Shakur, the BLA, you know, and I visited Marilyn Buck many times in prison when I was in grad school. And so, you know, and Jalil and I have been pen pals for a while, you know. I think where the way I teach Assata is to say, here at the level of pre-conscious interest, remember I got back to the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. She is saying, I'm an internationalist. She is saying, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. She is saying that the essential nature of suffering is between the haves and the have-nots. That's what she's saying in her work. However, I'm doing a symptomatic reading of her work. In the symptoms of her writing.
Frank, I think hold on a second. I think we're having a bad connection. You're not coming through very clearly here. I don't want to lose. It figures that you talked about Assata and all of a sudden the connection got bad there for a second. And it looks like you're a little frozen there as well. Damn.
Okay, you know?
A little bit better. Yeah, please continue. Sorry about that.
I'll be very brief and very, very simple. What I'm saying is that the BLA.
Damn, I think we lost you again, Frank. Just as you started to say the BLA, I don't know what's going on here.
Okay. Well, the feds come on the show if they want to talk.
Yeah. I mean, you know, now you seem to be a little bit more clear. Let's try one more time with where you were.
I'm going to try to be very, very briefly. I see in the writing of the BLA two layers of analysis. One is what they say about the problem, and two is how the problem exists through their symptomatic narration. So what I'm trying to say is that I am here today because of their actions, because of their energy, and because of what they wrote. And the sense that I'm getting from Assata's autobiography consciously is that the war is between the rich and the poor. But the sense that I get from the unconscious analysis of it is that I, Assata, suffer as a Black in an essential way that is different than my suffering as a poor person. And that's what my book will be about. That's what my articles are about. And so I'll end it there before the FBI decides they want to cut us off again.
No, I think you seem pretty good right now. And in fact, I want to, if we can, work in a few more of these questions. One of which you just raised, you made reference, and it's asking here about why do you rest so heavily on just one concept, the collective unconsciousness? And your analytic, if your analytic is based on deeply researched conceptual work, why does it rest so heavily on just one concept, the collective unconscious?
I don't think it does rest on concept. Yeah, so that's just
I don't.
Yeah, I would say please read Red, White, and Black so that you understand. Because in that book, I interrogate psychoanalysis, I interrogate indigenism, and I interrogate Marxism, and I interrogate white feminism, all in that one book.
Admittedly, but I mean, well, that's interesting you said that, because I'm thinking, because I struggle so much reading that book that when I read Afro-pessimism, I feel like you answer that question in this book as well. I don't feel like, I think you explain how you use psychoanalysis, but I don't feel like the collective unconscious is what dominates the.
No, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Okay. The only other thing, I think you've sort of answered this, but sort of just in some of the comments and questions I'm seeing here is this question of like my brother Kaba asked just very directly, if I can find it again, but why do you think in particular Black Marxists have so much of a struggle with Afro-pessimism? I mean, I know, like I have a tremendous affinity for the Black Marxist and communist histories and traditions, and for Marxist analysis. In my own mind, I actually, and I know this is going to sound, maybe upsetting to everybody, I don't see the levels of antagonism or contradiction between all of these camps that some see, but that's for another day, another time. From your perspective, why do you think in particular this issue that Afro-pessimism is a problem for Black Marxists?
I don't really know. I'm, I hit. I don't know. Go ahead.
No, in fact, let me do it this way. This is a better way. If I can quickly find, I want to quickly find this because that email exchange I referred to, I think if I could find it real quick, I should have pulled it up and just read it from the beginning. But in other words, the hostility in the message that I responded to, and the snide the response I got in return was that you and by extension me were not understanding the fundamental basis of white supremacy being in capital and colonial dominance. And in fact, in that Nation article, you explicitly say that anti-blackness cannot be seen as generating just out of capital and colonialism and enslavement. Obviously, from a Marxist perspective, that would be a fundamental challenge. But anyway, why is that? Why do you make that argument? And why is the Marxist analysis in terms of the origins of racism not satisfactory for you?
Well, having just criticized Anglo-American pedagogues for being empiricists, I'm going to get on an empiricist tip myself for just a minute here. Look, man, I was 17 when I went to the Soviet Union, just a dyed-in-the-wool communist, and it was just the grooviest thing in the world. And then one day I was at a bar, and I was hanging out with the Soviets were bringing in all these people from Black Africa to train them both militarily and in economics, and to train them in medicine. And I was sitting at a table with an Egyptian, a Ghanaian, a Nigerian, and I think another person from another part in Africa. It was about 2 a.m. And I thought, oh, this is heaven. This is the communist world that I always dreamed of. We were getting drunk and it was something out of like a storybook, because one of the white Russians brought in a real bear on a chain, you know, and Russian people, like they walk, sometimes they used to walk bears like the way we walk dogs, you know, brought in a bear on a chain, and people were dancing and stuff like that, you know. And as we got sloshed, I just said to the Africans, I said, this is just this is what I'm dreaming of. You know, this is what the world will be like when communism takes over the world. And one cat says to me, yeah, as long as you don't rock up at their house to date their daughters. Mm. You know, and here's me, 17 years old. This cat's like 25. And I'm arguing with his ass. No. There's no racism. You know, he says, they're training us and they want Soviet hegemony, but we can't, you know, date these women, you know. And then another dude, a friend of mine, later did a research on white women, black women in East and West Germany. He says there's a whole lot more happening in East Germany of black cats being able to date white women as long as they're over the age of 45 or 50. You know, in other words, what I mean is what his book is suggesting is that the farther away these white women get from their institutional web, the easier it is to slip into blackness. You know, then one of the cats in the Soviet Union at this bar, he said, I think James Brown's hot pants was all the rage back then, you know. This is 1973. And he had hot pants on a 45, and they were spinning records at the top. And he went over to the dude at the front of the bar and says, can you play this for us? And the people went berserk. You know, no, we're not playing this. We're not, you know. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, the Soviet Union is better than West Germany. Cuba is better than the Soviet Union. But what did I just say at the very beginning? Anti-Black anxiety organizes everybody's reality. Capitalists, communists, anything in between.
Man, I know, look, I know we're pushing up on 2 hours. I don't want to I just know that I guess I'm just hearing in my head what I know would be at least part of the response from a materialist camp, that even the story you're describing comes at the tail end of however many hundreds of years of enslavement and colonialism and the reproduction of I don't know, the social relations of anti-blackness and in capitalist relations, et cetera, and so on. And had we not gone through that, and could we ever go back and, you know, recreate or create a socialist communist world, that this would all dissipate, or at least be mitigated, because historically in human society we haven't seen the kind of racism and anti-blackness we see today.
Yeah, but if that response was a train, if that response was a train going from LA to New York City, I get off at Cincinnati, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because capitalism, in the global history of anti-blackness, capitalism is a relatively new paradigmatic formation, number one. Number two, when 300 to 400 years ago, when capitalism actually begins to emerge, it doesn't actually have to go the way it goes. There's mercantilism that is emerging out of France, and a certain kind of mercantilism that's emerging out of the Netherlands, and it is the capacity of the British Isles to hegemonize its socio-economic structure that makes for capitalism to actually dominate over certain forms of mercantilism that could have saturated the globe. Okay, so it doesn't actually have to be. That's number one. The number two thing is that anti-blackness starts 1,000 years before capitalism with the Arabs. So, I mean, these people are just being historically inaccurate, okay? Because they're, like Fanon, with psychoanalysis, they're suffering from a terminal degree called clientitis, where Marxism is their client.
What can I say? At my point, the way I've tried to rationalize it so that people in this world at this time can move and not get bogged down in these disagreements is to say, even if Marxists are correct, or the starting point is European enslavement, the fact is all of this still happened, and we are where we are. and that even at this point, a return or an advance to socialism or communism wouldn't take care of psychologically the anti-Blackness that would have been made so essential over the last several hundred years anyway.
Yeah.
So this is why, to me, when people are so have such a certain anti or antagonistic response to your work, I don't know. I just don't get it. I mean, it's one thing to not fully agree or whatever, but there does, I don't know. And I always just whittle it down to, you are offering up for what many is, simply put, a race first analysis, and people many people don't want that, and then many people don't want it in the form that you're offering it, which is why I still think it's confusing to me that some of these white liberal spaces would want to engage your work, because I'm not fully sure they're anyway. I always think they're not getting what you're saying.
They're not engaging the work. It's a form of negrophilia, like white boys in the suburbs buying more rap albums than black. Yeah, I mean, I'm not dumb. Okay, I don't believe that I actually have a relationship with white people.
No, in fact, you say very clearly in your book you don't. I mean, and then even in your most close personal relationships, it's still master slave, which is just, woo, Frank, damn. Anyway, it's just a lot. But listen, man, I look, I think. Anyway, I feel like we've covered a lot. You've been gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. My set of questions has been exhausted. Again, anyway, I encourage people to get the book and read Afro-pessimism and put it to some good use. And as we started, we can end with, go ahead.
The paperback, for people who want to pay $10 less, should be out in days to weeks. Paperback edition for $18.
Right on. There you go. However, whatever medium you get it, hard copy, soft copy, Kindle, whatever, make sure you get the book and check it out, and share this video to supplement it as well. Please do like, share, and subscribe. And Frank, man, thank you very much again. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you.
Likewise.
I wish you the best, man. Take good care.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you again. You take care.
Take good care. Likewise. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.